Hi, welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Miller, HOK's Director of Communications. Nursing education is undergoing its most significant transformation in decades. The shift to competency-based learning, where students must prove not just what they know, but what they can do, is reshaping how we teach, where we teach, and the buildings we design to support it. Today, we're exploring what that future looks like. I'm joined by three experts. First is Ami Shah. She is HOK's firm-wide healthcare education practice leader and based in our Atlanta studio. She has extensive experience as an architect and a lab planner developing cutting-edge spaces at universities for educating and training healthcare providers. Next, we are so pleased to be joined by Dr. Chris Smith, the Dean of College of Nursing at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. She is an educator as well as a nurse and a practicing family nurse practitioner. And then finally, we have Dr. Sarah Holton, who is a senior healthcare consultant here at HOK, based in our Tampa studio, and she draws on 3 decades of experience as a registered nurse and an operations strategist, and she helps create environments that both enhance staff performance and patient care. So we encourage everyone who's watching us now live on LinkedIn to join the conversation. Type questions and comments in the comment section or the chat section, and we will do our best to integrate those into the conversation. But first, let's begin. What does competency-based nursing education entail? How does it change what universities need in their facilities? Let's start, Dr. Smith, with you, and then we could open it up to Sarah and Ami.
Sure, absolutely. Competency-based education is somewhat new to nursing, but the cool thing about it is it actually helps encourage us to take the didactic and the clinical learning and intentionally mold them together rather than teaching something in the classroom didactically and then moving into the clinical arena to demonstrate the skills. We kind of pull it together, and it focuses on what students can actually do in practice rather than how many hours they spend in a class or in a skills lab learning these things. And the nice thing is that there are things called progression indicators that actually allow the student to move somewhat at their own pace to demonstrate that they are competent in a particular skill. It's measurable, and it's tied to the nursing standards and the outcomes that we now are working with through the American Association of Colleges of Nurses. And it really emphasizes observable performance. And the nice thing is that we educate students that we feel are generalists in the nursing world and can go into a facility. But actually what it does is it allows the person who is hiring that student for, say, an acute care facility to actually understand how competent the individual is. So it gives us a measurement.
Great. Ami, Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say I think what's wonderful about the competency-based focus is that idea, and I think, as Dr. Smith indicated, it's the opportunity to really demonstrate the capabilities of the individual. But it also is a two-way street because as the individual nurse, am learning a new skill and demonstrating that to my professors, I have that moment where I can ask and validate, do I have this correct? Rather than just assuming that I've learned it in school and I can go forward, but really demonstrating the activity allows me to validate with the professors that I haven't missed a step, that I've done it true to form, that I've followed all the guidelines and met the standard practice expectations in an opportunity that isn't in a live patient, for example, or isn't after I don't have that support of an instructor with me.
And the nice thing about that is and I've seen it in our program, we teach skills in our first semester. And as they progress through our program, sometimes they lose the ability as simply as taking a manual blood pressure. I had a little bit of a, oh my goodness moment when I was working with senior students getting ready to go into the real world in 3 months. And I said, take a manual blood pressure. And they were not too good at it. And they're so used to the equipment in the hospitals, and you put the cuff on and you hit a button and it reads it for you. So I think competency-based education solidifies as they progress through a nursing program that yes, they can still do these skills. They have retained them. We're focusing more like on Patricia Benner's novice to expert. And
Mm.
by the time they graduate from our programs, they should be pretty much competent, as in competency-based education, to for all these skills we've taught them.
Yeah, I remember Dr. Smith when we were designing the health education building together. You made it. You told us, and we made sure to make that simulation is not supplemental to education, but really the backbone, right? So we've started designing so that simulation is more a continuum across the entire spectrum. You talked about generalists, so we want to ensure that we give them enough safe environments for that, right? We talked about making sure that we're not just doing didactics. Going back to how you started, Dr. Smith, about making sure that every space is a space where they can not just learn theory, but a space where they can do or perform. So uh, even classrooms are not just didactics and not just active learning, but spaces where they could do tests and procedures and making sure we focus on the assessment part. You talked about the manual blood pressure part. We want to make sure that you, as an educator, are able to sit with the learner during their assessment, during debriefs, give them enough chance to reflect and improve on their skills. I think that's another very, very, very important point that as designers, we have to make sure that there are no physical limitations so that you can really teach and have competent nurses at the end of the day. I think that's key.
And picking up on that thread, I mean, what is the physical, are there physical differences when you are designing for this new pedagogical approach? Is it you need more space, you need different types of space, you need more seats, less seats? What's that impact?
Yeah, more seats is a little bit of a luxury, but what has happened is that we focus less on the counts of seats. I mean, enrollment counts and cohort sizes are important, but really on the types of space and a continuum, so that there isn't a fixed type. I mean, unless they're highly specialized, like if you have a suite for teaching nurse anesthesiologists, right? Those are specialty environments. But we need to make sure that we are focusing on the experience again. So, like if we're doing simulation, it's not an afterthought and we don't just have two spaces. In our building that we're going to see be inhabited very soon, we made sure programmatically simulation is a big component. It's 40% of the spaces. When I started my career, it was a much smaller component. We had a couple of spaces, right? Again, I'm going back to no more didactic, purely didactic environments, which means this is one area where classrooms, again, in quotations, are bigger. We have large spaces so that you can wheel in a stretcher or a mannequin, and that becomes a procedural skill space as well. Technology, it has to be platform agnostic. Over time, technology is going to change, and I think that has to be seamless throughout. So it's a layered, nuanced approach now, and we're no longer following the old rules. Really, that's obsolete.
One of the things we have to remember too, that the student has also changed. You
Mm.
know, 1,000 years ago when I was in school, somebody stood at the front of the class and told you what you needed to know. And now with the explosion of technology, our students are expecting more exciting ways to teach. I just can't stand up there with a PowerPoint and read off a PowerPoint. They want hands-on, immersive kind of learning, and that's where all of this technology has just really exploded, and it's really exciting to watch the student kind of the flip of the switch, and they get it because they're so used to dealing with those kinds of things just in their own spaces in their own homes. So it's kind
I
of
would
married.
say definitely what Dr. Smith, I was just going to echo exactly what you said. Perfect. We have this sort of new learning style, not necessarily a new learning style, but we're acknowledging that adult learner, right, who isn't just going to read it, isn't going to take a lecture, but is going to want to interact with the material. And I think as we think about that from a design perspective, we want these learning spaces to mimic the real life experience because it allows the sort of student to sort of immerse themselves in the true lived experience of a licensed professional in the future so that I know what it's like to be a nurse. And when I'm faced with this particular patient challenge in a room that would mimic that real life environment, I think that has to be underscored as vital. So I love, Ami's, your comment to say, we're making these spaces not bigger, but yeah, they are a little bit bigger because they're maybe different. They're not just a lecture hall. It's maybe a patient bedroom. It might be an operating theater. It might be an infusion chair. It might be some space where in the future, we're going to deliver care to patients in this space. It's got to look the same. It's got to be flexible enough to add in those new technologies. But again, I think going back to Dr. Smith perfectly said, we have the adult learners and they have different learning styles, but it's not just the standing in front of the lecture hall, as I recall also some time ago of just getting told what I need to know rather than doing it. So great point.
And one of the things I think that's so exciting about this technology, and Ami has heard this story 1,000 times whenever we have to talk to somebody, it's the ability of the faculty to change the simulation and use the equipment to take the student down a different path. And it's almost like the NCLEX. If you answer all the questions 100%, then they take you down a harder route. But we've seen this in simulation, especially with our nurse anesthesia students, where it almost sounds mean, but if they're doing too well, the faculty kind of change on the fly and put some new things in. And we had one student, and I remember this story very vividly, although it's been a while. And the student was doing okay, but it was in the OR, and he was providing the anesthesia, and the patient actually died because the faculty took him down this path where he had to critically think, how do I get out of this mess? And he didn't really. And so the pre-brief and the debrief is so very important. In our building, we have specialized spaces where we can, watch the scenario over again. But the point of this story was this student was put into a situation of malignant hyperthermia, which is very rare. And not 2 weeks later, the student came back to me and said, "You'll never guess what happened in the OR today." And I said, "Well, I hope you didn't kill somebody. I mean, we don't want that. That's not a good outcome."
No.
He said, "No." He said, "We had a case of malignant hyperthermia." And the anesthesiologist said, "How did you know what to do? I have never had a patient with malignant hyperthermia." And he said, "Oh, we had it in simulation over at UTC a couple of weeks ago." So it's the ability to provide the students with things that they may never come across, whether it's in anesthesia or if it's just in med surg or L&D, creating those areas where the students have to stop and think what they've learned and how to apply it. And that's where I think we've been missing up until we got into this realm where we could create scenarios where the student had to stop and say, wait a minute, if I make this decision, this might happen, but let's see what happens here. And there's no bad outcome. There's a conversation, but there's not a bad outcome. So I think that's the exciting thing. More to me, the more exciting thing about this technology and the ability of simulation.
Dr. Smith,
Well,
you had a
we've
comment. Oh, sorry. I was just
no,
going to
go
ask.
ahead.
You mentioned the idea of debriefing, and I wondered if these training spaces, and then also if it's mimicked in your real life hospital buildings as well, is that do you have how does how does a debriefing environment need to be created to support that learning, the continued learning of that person? Is there a conference type style room, or do you do that right in the simulation room?
No, we step out and we have the ability to record the simulation, so it is actually played back with the student and the faculty, and usually there's a couple of other students monitoring the simulation as well. So it's a learning environment for more than just one student. So they have the pre-brief, of course, and then they go and do the simulation. They return to a really nice conference style space. It's not huge. it'll probably, I mean, what it handles about 6 to 8 people, conference style. They pull up the video and they go through and they talk about it, because I think that is a lot of the value in all of this, not only the critical thinking that's required as you're going through it, but the faculty can sit with not only the student, but the other students who were observing and say, okay, so this decision was made. What happens if we make a different type of decision? So it's a very strong way to reinforce learning, but also to talk about decision making, using clinical judgment. What should we have done differently, or why do you think this worked, or why didn't it work? So it's very, very valuable. And again, a lot of our simulation is formative, which means there's no grade attached. So they're not really worried about whether they're going to pass, fail. But we do have some final simulations that are summative.
I remember you telling us about how sometimes the debrief is equally, if not greater importance than the simulation itself, because that's where the real learning happens. It's the reflection, and that's why we have such as that 1:1 ratio for every simulation space. We have a
Right.
debrief environment,
We do.
coming back a full circle to assessment and competency-based education, another change that we are propagating in design.
It's kind of closing the loop. Final thoughts, so to speak, which, we don't do very well in the hospital. So,
Well, we've been talking a lot about what I was going to bring up as the next question about really how do tech integrations make this competency-based education work. And we've talked a lot about simulation, but we also in our prep had discussed things like virtual assessment and how can we have a conversation about the now and the future without saying the words or the letters AI. So beyond simulation, how else do you see tech really being integral to the success of this new form of pedagogy?
well, I hate that you say we can't say AI,
No, we
because
can. Like, how could we not?
okay. And I'm not quite sure if this really answers the question, but it's something I think that's amazing to me. And I'm not as well tech oriented as the other faculty are, but we have an acute care nurse practitioner faculty member who is so into simulation and AI and all this kind of thing, and he's created a simulation where the patient is brought in from a nursing home, and he has to be intubated, and they're calling the daughter and saying, we've intubated your dad, and then the daughter goes off the chain because that's not what she wanted. Well, what happens is he calls a number on his phone, and it's AI on the other side. So the student has to talk to a phone and supposedly a real person, but based on the student's answers, AI generates the next question.
Got a little feedback loop there.
Okay. So anyway, so AI, and then what the cool thing is, she goes through this whole scenario and says, I'm sorry there were no orders on the chart when we came, and let's talk about how to deal with your dad in a, kind and compassionate manner, etc. But AI also generates a rubric for the faculty member to grade how the student responded. So it's not me saying, oh, she did a great job, or no, she really didn't. There's an AI generated rubric, which of course you have to look at and make sure it makes sense. So, AI it's just going to explode, and we need to embrace it, and we do here at UTC.
I would say definitely that the other part that I love about the technologies and AI included is I used to function years ago as a resource nurse. This is a nurse that monitors sort of the activities of patients all across the hospital. And when we see a patient heading in the wrong direction, we typically come up alongside the primary nurse and support their work to return the patient back to an optimized health status. So the ability to have these new, I would say in the last 10 years, we've seen an explosion of the audio and visual connections to hospital rooms, which allows us to sort of feed that into a single location where multiple resource nurses can sort of observe what's happening to the patient. We also can have AI help us understand the trends that are happening with their sort of physiologic monitoring or labs or other things that can feed, say, early warning that this patient might be heading in the wrong direction, that we will need to deploy teams to support them. And so I think that the idea that AI or telehealth type services are advancing our ability as nurses and as practitioners within a hospital system to team up to make sure that we ensure the best possible outcome for the patient. But it's really that collaborative work that we've seen over the last 15 years, an explosion of that interprofessional model that is so vital to the success of our patients. And I think the simulation spaces or the telehealth type of environments help us learn those skills and techniques that can help us be better partners. Um, I don't know, Dr. Smith, if you've had, that similar use of sort of resource nurses that can virtually connect to your spaces, and if that's used at all in the education environment.
Not at this particular time, but in moving our building forward, we are probably going to open an interprofessional center of education in healthcare. And we've already kind of started that. And Sarah, I don't know if this is actually answering your question, but what we've done is we've gone over to one of the level 1 trauma centers, and we've taken our students with their new graduate nurses, and we've run through a simulation where we took them from the ED, the nurse from the ED, to the OR, to the ICU, and then, the PACU, then the ICU. And so the new graduate nurses who were employed by the hospital went through a simulation with our nurse practitioner students who,
Oh,
are
wow.
already registered nurses, so they can kind of talk on the other side. So we're reaching out already, even though our space is not quite ready. And interprofessionalism is going to be huge for us.
Mhm.
And I think that's the way to go in the future. It's going to be, it's something that, you and I have talked about for decades.
Yep.
The physician is not the head of the team. He or she is part of the team, and we're really moving towards that. And I think simulation can just absolutely support how important that decision making is from everybody at the bedside.
Yeah.
Yeah, all our spaces are designed for IPE, right? Dr. Smith, we designed our spaces to be larger. And since you're poised right at the edge of the medical district and, as a gateway building, I'm excited about that. Sarah and you both made a point about the hospital environment. When it comes to technology, the part I'm really excited about in the learning environment is getting spaces ready to absorb things like ambient AI, smart patient rooms, like you were talking about, Sarah, you know, uh, fall detection, and then even how does a patient room uh, uh, engage with what a learner is doing to produce the rubric that Dr. Smith, you were talking about, right?
Oh,
So our space, uh, the the technology backbone for our building is very robust. We've got a strong network so that as this evolves, the building will be able to adapt to any new technology. Well, I won't say any, many new technologies that are brought in, including the AR, VR space that we have, and we've put it, front and center as you enter to really showcase it. So I'm excited to see how that evolves, how gaming is brought in as a part of
mhm.
learning, making it even more fun. You talked about how learners are expecting that. You can't just give them a book or a paper and expect them to learn. Really, I can't wait for the building to be inhabited and for you to be teaching these future learners.
Well, we've had what I think is a really interesting question from our live audience. It takes us in a slightly different direction, but I thought I would throw it out. They want to know, do you see lessons from competency-based nursing education translating into the workplace and into healthcare projects outside of academic environments? So I feel like, Ami, you're already taking us there talking about the hospital setting.
Yeah, absolutely. We see these all the time. That's a fantastic question. So I think what is really fantastic is Dr. Smith, if we think about this generation of nurses that's learning in your simulation programs, they are learning a way to standardize their care, to advance their learning, to maybe follow a new standard, to partner with other people in that. So in the simulation space, they can kind of in a safe environment learn, truly learn, so that they are competent to go out into the real world. When you get into the hospital, which is should be the echo of that same learning environment, in hospitals, as a practicing nurse, you think about it, you are always learning something new. We used to joke that as soon as something was printed, it was outdated, and that's still the case. So we should be in that sort of continuous learning model in the hospital environments. And so ideally, when we're building a hospital, we want to make sure that it echoes that learning environment. So we will bring forward simulation spaces into hospitals and ideally maintain that partnership with the education environment like the nursing school or the medical school to ensure that we are continuously echoing what the new practices for adult learners in the hospital system and to refresh our information. But you think about it, in 10 years time, the nurses that graduated this last week or in the next week or so that will be graduating, they will anticipate that when they are trained for their newest skill, that they have a simulation space just like they have in the university floor. And I think, so I think we're going to need to be thoughtful as we design hospitals. And I've done this already in some of the organizations that I've partnered with, is that we're making sure that we integrate simulation spaces, create that flexible environment for new technologies to come forward, to create thinking about using telehealth inside a patient environment so that we can do this sort of resource nursing or virtual learning in some capacities. Making sure that there's that interprofessional space that Dr. Smith mentioned. So all those things I think are echoed ideally in the future hospital, because I think the nurses that again graduated this last week, they're going to expect it when they need the new skill.
And one of the things we're doing here is our simulation center is endorsed by an Axel, and we are moving towards accreditation when we're in the new building and have all this great equipment and space and learning opportunities. And we're moving in that way, not just for our students, but for our community. And for example, a nurse anesthetist who has been out of practice for many years and wants to come back into the OR will have to go through a program of simulation and recertification, so to speak. And so when we get this center accredited, we can then offer that to CRNAs who have been out of practice for a while. And I would think we could do the same thing, although acute care nurse practitioners don't require that. But offering these kind of things that they might not have the ability to get in their hospital settings. We have had a good partnership for many years with the 3 hospitals here. And when we first started this conversation, we'll remember we were going to build this nice simulation center and then allow the hospitals to come in and use space. That will still be the same, but they all have some type of simulation in their facilities now. But we will be the gold standard, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Since
Yes.
we're talking about the professional realm, nursing is facing a very well documented workforce shortage all across the country, and I would hazard maybe across the globe. How does the design of these types of educational facilities play a role in both attracting students, preparing them to stay in the profession, and maybe even attracting staff and professors for which you're probably competing, Dr. Smith?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit humble, but not really. I don't have a problem. I am fully employed. I have no vacancies right now, and I've never really had a problem finding faculty. And I think it's
Mhm.
because of the environment we have at the university. It's a great environment, a good place to work. As far as attracting students, we are building this building because we have more than we can handle. We have
Mhm.
many more applicants to the BSN program than we can afford. So the state of Tennessee gave us money to build this building, partial money to build the building, to increase our enrollment by 150%. Right now, our nurse anesthesia program takes 33 students. We have 386 applicants. So, we're okay. But I think as students, applicants to programs are looking, they're not going to be satisfied with sitting in a brick and mortar place where you're watching film strips from the 60s. They want to have the most cutting edge and most interactive learning styles because that's what they expect now. We talked about it already. They expect the most current technology and challenging opportunities. So, I think that if we want to fill the nursing void, we've got to step up and offer them opportunities that will place them in good stead to walk into a hospital. Now we say, the term across the country is practice ready. Well, no, that's not necessarily what we need to be saying. We need to be saying they're competent to walk into the hospital on day one and then grow from there. Because practice ready means I can go into the hospital on day one as a new acute care nurse practitioner graduate and confidently put a chest tube in, and then, if you have to intubate, go there. I think there's a little bit of ramp up time there, but competency-based education will tell us that yes, we have students who are competent in placing chest tubes or determining who needs to be intubated or when they can come off of ventilation, etc. So it's high stakes, and if you don't step up and keep up, I think students are going to go elsewhere because they are our customers. I hate to think of it like that. It sounds more retail than education. But we have to step up and offer them what's going to suit their needs and make them competent.
I think the other piece about that is that we have the idea that one of the elements, if you think about that, there's a triad that has to do with burnout in nurses. And one of those is the sense of professional efficacy. And that's really that validation that I'm able to perform, that I believe in myself, that I can execute that chest tube, I can intubate, and so the idea that I think, me and Dr. Smith have created a space that allows that nurse to validate that, yes, they can understand, that they can prove to themselves that they will be competent, that their work is efficacious, that so I think that's the piece that, which is so nice about this competency learning shift, is that I have the moment to validate what I've achieved. And so it takes off that one leg of risk that we have with burnout among nurses. I mean, there's a host of other things that compound that, but I think one piece that happens is that sometimes you're in environments where you just don't have the confidence that what you're doing is really making a difference for the patient. And so if you can prove to yourself that, yes, I'm competent, I can do this, and I can prove it to my peers and prove it to the faculty in a space that supports that validation, I think that's really a big step. And that's what I think nursing students are looking for, is they're looking for a space that helps them really deeply understand the work, really learn those skills. And I think this environment is going to do just that. It's going to deliver just that.
Yeah,
And
I'm
Sarah, I think
hoping one of those, sorry, Dr. Smith,
that's
one
good.
of those students who signed the beam as it went up, I'm hoping when they actually walk in and they see that inside outside connection and they see the OR, they feel like this is my future and I can see myself making a difference. I feel like that is where, or the high school student that Dr. Smith is going to interview in this building. I hope they see a future for themselves and I hope they feel, yes, this is where I belong. This is how I'm going to make an impact in Tennessee and across. I mean, if we do that, then we've achieved the goals for the building.
I think we have.
Recruitment across the board. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, Sarah, when you were speaking, I thought of, when we're dealing with competency-based education and demonstrating that these students are competent, it takes the subjectivity out of it.
Yeah.
Can you do this? And that's been my complaint all along in nursing. I am the queen of rubrics. I do everything by a rubric. I do not do anything subjectively. And maybe it's self-defense. I want to, if they come back and say, why'd you give me this grade? I can say, here, this is why you got this grade. But it takes the subjectivity out of it and it places real value in how they have achieved what they've achieved. So it's an interesting time in education.
Well, that feels like a perfect conclusion to the conversation. I want to thank you all for participating and everyone who's joined us live. If you continue to have questions or comments, drop them in the chat and we will get back to you and respond to them as we can. This conversation will live on as a video that you can go back to if you didn't get to watch the whole thing. And if you don't follow our three panelists already on LinkedIn, I suggest you reach out and connect to them. Thank you all. This has been so insightful and informative, and we look forward to talking to you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, guys.